Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite sales podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and today we have a very special guest. We have Josh Solomon, the VP of Revenue at Ask AI. And no surprise today, we're going to be talking a lot about AI and kind of zooming out to get Josh's perspective, both as a sales leader and as an executive building out an AI native startup, how he kind of sees the world and hopefully giving you a perspective. But yeah, Josh, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited.
Well, before we get into the details and nerd out on all things go to market and AI, would be great to hear a bit about yourself and your journey to revenue leadership, and how you got on this crazy journey.
Sure. Yeah. So I totally stumbled into it. Um, Once upon a time, I was a university kid who was on the side working at Future Shop, learning like the sales ropes of commission selling. And that environment taught me a lot about sales. And at the time, I was really unhappy in university. I was like doing fine, but it just wasn't really clicking for me. And I had a friend who had left Future Shop and gone to this startup. And he basically said, "Hey, we're looking for people to come sell here." And that was about as much as I knew about what a startup was at the time. And I kind of just jumped at this first opportunity to do anything other than what I was doing then. And so that led me into the world of startups. I spent a lot of time at that company, really like going from being like the third employee to being a real company that served other real companies
Yeah.
like Facebook and every major data center across the world. And so that pulled me in two directions. And one was through into sales leadership as we started to grow our team. And the other was actually sort of the launch point towards AI. And so maybe about 8 years ago, towards the tail end of my journey at that company, we were in a position where I was leading our enterprise sales org, but we were also building this really interesting partnership with Facebook or Meta, Facebook at the time, where they were investing in a product that we were building and bringing to market. And that started to shape a lot of what we were doing with them. And they had this core hypothesis at the time that I really sort of like really opened my eyes. And they basically said in 2022, 50% of our workforce is going to be will be millennials, and they won't use traditional business systems. They're not going to work in the same tooling that they're used to working in, and therefore we need to bring everything into the modern UI. And for them, the modern UI was Workplace.
Mm.
Their sort of equivalent of Slack.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
we
it's a big
started
bet. Yeah.
a big bet, right? And so we started building a lot of automation at that time from like what we were providing was security solutions for their campuses and for their data centers. And we started building a lot of automation about how to actually manage those tools inside of Workplace. And that was sort of my first foray into bots and AI in some capacity. And when I ended up leaving the company, I essentially settled on the idea that the bot thing for the security company wasn't the right play, but it was actually its own product and its own initiative. And I started building it on the side. And I was building it with what I would call like blinders on. I was building it with this view of the security world. How do we integrate into a variety of security data, pull it into one place, and then make it accessible via an AI agent, or what you would call an AI agent today? And as I went through that work, I got connected to a company who was already doing it with a much broader, bigger, and more impactful vision.
Mhm.
And it kind of removed the blinders from me. And so I joined a company called Ada, who is one of the leaders in conversational AI, really focused on how to provide amazing customer experiences through AI. And that really got me into the world of AI and sales leadership. So spent 4 or 5 years there, and now over at Ask AI, building out the revenue org here.
Very cool. It's interesting to see, how people in the kind of like infancy of some of these technologies, kind of learn about it. And it seems like you were, yeah, very, very early with that kind of meta collaboration, and then with Ada and now with Ask AI. Um, yeah, well, getting into, I know we had three topics we wanted to dive into, kind of to give a sneak peek. We're going to talk first about like zooming out before we get into the specifics, like how should we be thinking about using this new tool set to kind of drive results. Second is kind of maybe a more of a longer term, medium term mindset around this and what that means for revenue leaders. And then the last piece, we're going to talk about my favorite topic, which is playbooks and AI. So especially excited for that. But yeah, kicking off, What do you mean by zooming out, and what kind of lens would you give to other leaders that might have not spent the last 8 years, thinking about AI and are trying to wrap their heads around, hey, like how do I bring value to my team
Sure.
this way?
Sure. I think I would even maybe start before we talk about how to bring value to your team. I think it's a bit of a recognition about where are we and what's really happening to your business. So if you're an executive in a B2B SaaS company today, I think you need to be hyper aware of the change in the market that's happening. And the reason is that any technological moat that you think you have today is being immediately decayed. And so if you play this out over time, right, the technology moat is not going to be really defendable,
Hmm.
and the increasing competitive pressure from a feature perspective, a price perspective, is going to be overwhelming for almost everybody in every market and every nook and cranny inside of SaaS. And so you start to think about this over the course of time, like where does that really leave you? And my thesis here is that actually it means that you need to win on experience, right? What are the moats that you can really build? You can build an experience moat, you can build a skill moat, you can build a culture moat, but all of these things really show up to your customer and how they experience working with your business.
Hmm.
And today, I think we've got ourselves in a position where this is almost impossible for the same audience, right? So if you're sitting there and you're like, okay, so you're either an executive looking at like the competitive space that you're living in, or you're a departmental leader owning sales or CS, right? We've created a world where, okay, well, why is it so hard to actually provide a great customer experience? Well, the reason is that like sales and CS live in two different countries. One country is called Salesforce, one country is called Gainsight. And so of course these two teams have tension between them because they understand the world differently. And products living in a different continent in Notion, engineering's off it in Jira, et cetera. So as we think about the amount of teams, touch points, and like tools that are actually involved in getting connected and providing a strong customer experience with AI, today it's really hard. And so it's really to me this is like the interesting opportunity where when we get into the playbooks, how you can start to rethink how you're approaching your go-to-market or your CX motions to go AI native, right? And actually to build from the ground up. Because we've sort of reverse engineer ourselves into a tricky spot. With hybrid work and verticalized SaaS, we've put people in their own individual islands. That's really making it hard to go achieve something like this.
Yeah, I think even outside of the technology, what I'm seeing is a trend towards, like you're saying, that customer journey, customer experience. And like you're right, there was a proliferation of great tools in theory for each of these teams. But yes, maybe the teams got 20, 30% better, but then the customer experience, like you said, degraded because then we didn't have the connectivity. And then you go and ask RevOps to figure out how to do all this like technical, craziness that just wasn't built to do that, right? Like you're saying. So that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, and you can see it. I think we all inherently know the problems there, but we don't actually articulate it as impact to the customer.
Yeah.
And so I was talking at an event last week in New York and asked a simple question. Okay, how many of you in this room have a channel or channels in Slack dedicated for escalations? Everyone's hand went up, right? Okay, well, how many of you like that experience or that process? Nobody's hand went up, right? And so we've created a world where our customers are trained to wait on us as we go and like sort of push off to the next island and try to create this like sort of disjointed experience for them. But it shows up in these like microcosm ways. But on the other side of that, a customer's waiting. And I think like this is where there's this massive opportunity to actually look at all of the touch points through from like first land on the website through to tech support and back around, and really what's happening at each stage of the life cycle, and where are the easy wins to start to shore these up with AI because there's lots of them.
Totally. Yeah, I think this has been a massive trend, not just part of, again, kind of the AI native story, but the cost of capital going up, pressure on, yeah, like you said, kind of cost for software or other tools or any expenditure, even people. How do we drive more efficient, more efficiency and growth? Well, that goes back to what's the experience like, right? Like, why are they questioning working with you? Do you create these moments in the customer journey where it's a poor experience and you just can't afford that anymore? And I think we could before. It kind of was created because it didn't really matter, right? We didn't
Yes.
kind of second guess, hey, maybe we will churn for this reason, or hey, maybe we will not make this buying decision based on the experience we're having. I think the bar is just kind of globally being raised this moment in time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you see this reflected a lot again from the customer's lens when you read like a Gartner report about how much time customers spend not with your team, right? So we all
Yeah.
understand, okay, the customer is not spending any time with your team anymore. And then we still look at our deal cycles and go, well, they're getting longer. So then, well, what's happening in that time? What are your reps doing? Well, they're spending a lot of time trying to get from point A to point B in your sales process or your org structure or whatever admin world you've created inside of that, right? And
Totally.
so I think there's like we all know inherently as someone who works in one of these companies, how hard it is to get things done at any scale of company,
Yeah.
right? But there's, I think, less understanding of, oh, this is actually impacting the customer and impacting our bottom line. And my thesis here is over the course of time, this is the thing that you will be, sort of like live or die on.
Totally. So yeah, we zoomed out. All of those kind of trends again, more competitive, harder to differentiate. What really matters again, like you're saying, are the technology moats go down as the new ChatGPT or Claude model, whatever comes out. That's kind of the bleeding edge. We need to figure out how to differentiate and kind of drive better customer experience. What does that mean, today or this quarter or this year? Like how do you think about the actions that you can take as a leader to kind of close that gap?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, well, the first thing is that, like, if I'm thinking about your audience and someone who's living in a revenue leadership seat, whether it's for, sales side or CS side, these are the people who have the biggest opportunity to get things right. Right. I think in terms of business impact, if you're able to really strategically apply AI to your motion, to your playbook, you have the biggest opportunity to win. The I think the unfortunate part is the current path that the market's taking us down, I think is probably one that's going to fail, or at least there will be a lot of failure along the way. And I have sort of like two observations about this. And so one is that I think a lot of the world is being bent towards very shiny, but not really technically feasible use cases that we're seeing in LinkedIn, we
Mm,
see on Twitter, and they're like great proof of concept. But then when you actually go and try to deploy something like this in any size of like enterprise organization, it's not even possible, right? And so there's like this like mini letdown with AI that I think we're going to go through. And if you think of the traditional like hype cycle, I
yeah.
don't know that we're going to see with this technology this like trough of despair or trough of disappointment. But I do think it kind of skirts through this a little bit because there's a lot of promise and there's still a lot of question mark about like, does it actually work and how do I measure the
Yeah.
success?
So
So on one,
what are some of those examples, right? Like let's dig in. Like what are some of the things that seem very demoable but might not, be a solution for, a 5,000 person company?
for sure. Well, I think there's a couple things that go into it. There's when you break out why it might not work. I think there's two things you need to probably be considering, maybe three things actually. One is for any of these things to actually be applied effectively to your business, you need to have strong understanding of some sort of knowledge, right? So I think even on the sort of the SMB side of the market, I think a lot of people are looking to these AI SDRs and saying, look, we have a pipeline problem, use an AI SDR and it's going to figure it out. But if you've never booked a meeting through outbound, or you don't have a clear playbook or a clear set of messaging, how is this AI agent
Mm.
going to help you go and do
So
this?
that's what you mean about knowledge gap is like, well, to automate something, you need to know how to solve it first and then put it on rails. Whereas people are looking at this as like true superhuman intelligence to both figure out the problem and then to go and do the job without you first figuring it out.
Exactly. I would look at the knowledge gap in two different ways. One is like, do you have core knowledge that you can actually use for these systems to have a high degree of output? And then the other is like, do you have sufficient knowledge across your team and organization in order for them to run your playbooks
Hmm.
effectively?
Okay,
And
so this
can you enhance that?
operationalizing it is one side, but then the first is if we could operationalize it, do we even know what the inputs are to make that
Ex
happen? Yeah.
exactly. And my fundamental thinking on this is that there's actually so many low cost, high impact internal use cases before you start automating outbound
Yeah.
that are more impactful to you that actually raise the bar for how your team performs that you should invest in now while the technology develops. Because I think a lot of these whiz bang use cases, they're going to be possible, but they're not today. And so when someone tells you, hey, I've got this, this agent infrastructure that does 7 steps for you, what that actually means is there's 7 points in time where the AI can fail. And if it doesn't have a really good understanding of a chord or your business, it's going to fail harder and faster. And
Mm.
so, there's technological solves for this that I think are coming and that are being hardened. But I think you need to be really wary of that motion, right? So that's one. This like idea of sort of like the what can you do and what can't you do.
Yeah.
I think the other place that's hard for leaders today is they have a tech stack, and every one of those vendors is racing to try to have them adopt some AI add-on.
Yes.
Right? So like that's a hard, everyone that I talk to is sort of I've gone as far as to say like, look, they're harassing me to like turn this thing on, which is a tough spot to be in. And I think you're at risk of like waking up in 2027 with thousands of AI add-ons that looks way worse than it did in COVID,
Yeah.
and see a similar style of tool bloat.
Yeah. No, that's something that we're hearing from every revenue leader, every rep, every PEVC firm we talk to is like, hey, go and figure this thing out. But it feels like everyone's pitching, kind of core product with a chat GPT wrap or whatever it is. And is that the kind of core solution? So I'd be curious to hear. Yeah, so definitely common themes that I'm hearing. What's your perspective after being in the space for a while, especially in the B2B and enterprise world, of the right way? Like, what's the
Yeah,
what's the crawl, walk, run maybe for folks that haven't done this or have been talking a lot about bringing these tools
sure.
and technology? What's step one to this?
Yeah, I think, well, okay, first step one is really to understand what business problem are you trying to solve. I think there's still a lot of hysteria about
Yeah.
like we're going to deploy some AI, and then
Yeah, we've been
what I
we've
do,
been laughing about this. Like literally the quotes will be, I've been told by the board, I've been asked by my boss to deploy it. Like no like,
exactly,
hey, here's the low-hanging fruit, here's the cost we're trying to cut, here's the, thing we're trying to
right,
move up to the right. Just literally
right.
technology, use it in some way. So that's a great place to start.
Exactly. So figure out the business problem. And look, to the first point about your vendors, their product managers are having that same conversation internally, right? So it's like, what are you doing with AI? So they don't know what the feature is for. They just need to figure out a way to jam UI into it, right? And like another thing I've been thinking a lot about is like, does every product really need a chat interface? Like, I don't think so. There's a lot of other ways you can enforce a better product experience, a better user experience, drive more value with it or without AI than inserting a chat interface into everything, right? And so we've kind of like locked ourselves in that AI is a chat interface, and I don't think that it has to be that way.
Yeah.
So the first thing I think is like, okay, what problem are you actually trying to solve? And like getting pretty clear on that. The second is to start to think about, okay, a little bit past like what are the steps to get there, right? And I think today there's a lot of like, we have a pipeline problem, turn on the AI SDR. We have a prospecting problem, turn this thing on. Instead of really looking at two things. What is like sort of my what is like my I'm calling it like the medium term vision. I don't think a long term vision really exists. What is the like longer term vision for AI for our organization? And also, how does that parallel or meet the business's roadmap for AI? And I think one thing that's really different about this technology and like that I think is fundamentally changing is that you can read all the buzz about SaaS is dead or whatever. I don't think that's true. But what I do think is changing is that very narrow vertical SaaS solutions are going to face a lot of challenge. And the inherent benefit of AI that we're not really discussing is the speed and quality and depth of products you can actually build if applied correctly. So in over the next 2 years, you're going to see more and more horizontal applications that are able to actually take on use cases in your for your business, for your team, and for other teams under one hood.
Yeah.
And so this gives this really interesting opportunity to actually look at, okay, well, what is sales doing and what is CS doing? And can we actually drive them out of the same platform? And if we're driving them out of the same platform, then what is the benefit of having those teams using the same tooling from a performance perspective, from a risk perspective, and from a cost perspective?
Totally. Well, then my question back to that is, I hear, the same kind of things, but it's funny, you go into teams, especially if you've, sold up market before, and how far back they are from a technology adoption perspective. So I have less of that concern building a SaaS product of like,
Sure.
I see people are so far, the teams that need the most help aren't even using, you know, technology yet in an informed way and have such low adoption. So I think that's really like probably still the biggest challenge, regardless of if it's AI native or, standard SaaS, getting teams to adopt these things. So I'm curious to get
Agreed.
your take on, you're talking about these horizontal tools, all the stuff that isn't just baked for certain roles, how much harder is that from a UX experience perspective, right? Like the role of product designers in this, it's not just the back end infrastructure technology. If you're building tools for multiple roles, that feels exponentially more complex to build the right tools and drive the adoption across multiple teams, right?
I actually am not sure, and I think okay. The first thing is that I totally agree about the enablement side and the change management side of getting to an AI like centered way
Yeah.
of working,
Some people still
right?
struggle to input that are required as part of the job to input, you know, whatever 5 minutes at the end of the day things into Salesforce, regardless of
Yeah,
if it's annoying, whatever. Like people are still not doing that, so then are
correct.
suddenly people, and they can't. Partly because they can't figure it out still at some teams, if you can believe it. So then, how do we go to this next generation of tooling
Right.
across all these
Right.
roles?
But this is where I think like to me the where to start is like stop getting your reps to update Salesforce. Like AI can do this for you really effectively, and there's like 7 different ways to do
So
it.
is it hands
Right.
off then? The solution is actually then they're using it, but in the background, and they're not touching it, or
I think there's ways to do it hands on and
okay,
hands on and hands off. Like so one like the way that my approach has been is like what are the key moments in your playbook, right? All of us as sales leaders or as revenue leaders have this playbook. We know what the critical moments are pre, during, and after a call, right? And we have SOPs and what we need to be done from an admin perspective, from an update perspective, et cetera. And it rarely gets done. And the reason it rarely gets done is not because the rep is lazy or like not capable of doing it. It's because it's actually really hard and they have a lot of work to do. And so if, I used this example last week of like, okay, if you look at it, a customer email, well, like what's actually in the email? Like there's some questions. Some of those questions are product questions. Some of them are security questions. There's actually an escalation in there. There's a feature request. And the idea is that like today's state is like, hey, that rep should go to 7 different places, gather all the information, bug Ross, who's super important and valuable, and then compile an answer and get back to them. So you're like, Josh, well, why didn't you update the CRM? Well, I just took 3 hours to answer this one email, and that I'm still trying to track down. So
yeah,
I think there's a way to sort of, if you think about reimagining the playbook, it's like what actually happens at each one of these moments and how do we use AI either in a proactive manner in the background to like support that, or to give reps the tooling to make it super simple and like go here, click this button, read it, and say yes. And I think there's a different approaches for different folks, but I think this is where the big opportunity actually comes, in my opinion.
got it. Yeah, it sounds like then more your vision for the future is less like explicit click on these buttons like we used to do, and more like baking it into the workflow. So like, a great example of this,
Correct.
obviously in the go-to-market tech world would be, like a Gong or Zoom info, Gong being the conversational, hey, play back. I don't have to just listen to it. It's, hey, we weren't listening to our calls before. It's like, no, here's the top 10 things from that. Or with Zoom
Yeah.
info, the AI copilot being like, and here's the top things based on this account if you want to go after it.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's a kind of similar thing. Instead of, hey, fill this stuff out, like we'll pull it into your workflow and give you that
Yeah,
information.
exactly. And like, so let's think about a couple like common use cases that you can think about, like level one or level two. If you're in CS today, you go on a call, your customer asks you for 3 features. You have a responsibility to document these in a specific way,
Yeah.
go to Jira, put them into Jira, and hope that engineering picks them up. Today's state would let you go, hey, are there feature requests for this? Yes, there are already. Okay, great.
Plus
No,
one.
they're, yeah, exactly. No, they're not. No, there isn't any. Would you like to submit them? Oh, yeah, here they are in the template using the Gong call that we just had. Push them into Jira,
Yeah.
right? So that's like a level, what I would call like super possible use case today. Level two of that is like, hey, Ross, you had a call today with Josh. He asked for these 3 feature requests. I've checked and 2 of them aren't available. Do you want me to update
Mm,
them? Right. And so like I think moving from this way of like enabling the rep to supporting the rep, right?
yeah.
And really thinking about like if that rep had an EA, what would they be doing?
Yes, that's kind of what's
Right.
going to my mind. It was like you literally have an assistant with you, and they're not doing the
Exactly.
work like the AI SDR example. They're not sending out every email, not pinging you. They're like, here's a draft. Hey, by the way,
Exactly.
I know you're busy after that back-to-back call. Here's a draft ready to go. And here's the questions that you might have wanted to ask the product team to respond to this, as a follow-up. So
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can see this like over the course of time. And I just think of them in 2 ways. Like one is like the hand holding of the rep, making their life easier so they have hours or days back to spend in front of your customers, which is what you want them doing. If you're doing that well, you can support them with strong knowledge, verified knowledge to perform at a higher level and get them through their job way faster. The other is like, what are the things that we want to run in like what I would call batch mode that like tell me all everything about our accounts and like show me a report on the back end, right? And there's probably a change in the way that leaders are going to think about their insights and
Yeah.
that reps are going to do their work.
Totally. Well, before we get to the last part in terms of like how does this change kind of your whole playbook as a revenue leader, curious, one of my thoughts around this, if you give folks this assistant or kind of these superpowers, my assumption is going to be the top performers continue to break further away from the average. And the same thing with the bottom performers. Like if the average person can kind of use this, they get a bit better. The bottom performers, if they can't figure it out, like it's even worse. But the top performers, typically the biggest challenge are they can't juggle more deals, right? You would give your top, there's this massive, gap between
Exactly.
your top few people and the rest in sales because it's a binary outcome. You get a deal done, especially large deals, you get it done or not. And so I feel like that gap's going to grow because they can work on potentially, even if it's just twice as many deals
Mhm.
or 50% or 20% more, work one or two more deals. That could be one other person's entire job and output for the year. So I'm curious to get your take on how that changes the standard deviation of the team and what that means for the people side of the
Yeah.
business.
Yeah, I think you're likely probably right. I think there's two approaches, and I'll give you maybe some examples. Like one approach is what you articulated, which is I continue to only hire top performers, and I remove all of the stuff that's in their way, so they can take on twice as many deals. And I look at my my capacity model in a really different light, right? And like I think this is like part of the change that I'm starting to go through is like, okay, well, do like are we going to like build out our capacity plan in the same way against the a traditional quota model,
Yeah.
or are we going to bet more on great reps with great tools and better supporting cast from a technical perspective or from a consulting perspective
Yeah.
to get those reps to way past their number? And I think this is like this is an active conversation that we're in very early innings of seeing come together.
Yeah.
The other is more like a labor arbitrage, strategy, which is like actually I'm not going to hire top reps. I'm going to hire really smart, really capable people in international markets, and I'm
Mm.
going to give them very low cost tooling to help them perform. And so a practical example of that is one of our customers just opened an offshore team, and that offshore team is brand new. They've given them basic AI tooling, and that team within 3 months was outperforming their US team, and because they had access to the knowledge and they had the ability to do basic copywriting things, and this is a big change. And so if you look at the world of offshore labor prior, it was like we're going to give our level one work over here,
Yeah.
right, so that we can do our level two and three work over here. But I think that might change, and that you can actually put more of level two and level three at a lower cost
Interesting.
in other markets.
Yeah, I guess my assumption would be, those not being mutually exclusive, like the
Correct.
top things, the most important things you could have fewer people do, and those are the really hard to find, hard to replace people, but then
Yes.
almost everything else. So you're kind of raising the bar for what you would quote unquote offshore, whatever that looks like.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then, kind of have that more investment in the top people that are just so hard to replace. Like, those people come around, and you're like, oh, if I just had one more, that would make such a massive difference. It feels like you're able
Yeah.
to do that, but then also for the core stuff, be able to, like you said, kind of have that
Yeah.
labor arbitrage.
Agreed. And the way that I would look at the reality today is that for every role, during my time at Ada, I think we were pretty early in this message of like, take your best support rep, turn them into an AI expert, and then replicate that rep at scale, right? In today's state of AI, you can kind of apply that to any market, right? Or any role. Take your best marketer, make them AI native, help them replicate marketing at scale. And so I think the way to probably think about getting started there is like, well, what is the level one work that
Yeah.
my reps are doing today? Who is the best at it? And then how do I get all of that away and, in Ross's way? Because we all have those reps or superstars that we
Yeah.
want to replicate.
Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it, and kind of mirrors a lot of how we've talked about it, because with the Accord, right, we're talking about the hardest of the hard part of enterprise sales and onboarding and CS, when there's a dozen people internally and externally collaborating, like AI solving that right away and automatically sending notes on your most important multi-million dollar deals, like probably not what people are looking for to start. But what are the parts of those top performers' jobs that could be helpful, right? Some of the research, some of this updating, right? And that's kind of, I feel like, where the most forward thinking folks have started to invest in. And
Yeah,
I think the other folks that are looking for, like you said, that kind of whiz bang solution have wasted a lot of time and money and kind of negatively impacted their own customer journey by
right.
jumping to the, where hopefully we are in a year or two by completely, replacing, people or workflows.
Yeah. And I mean, let's take that example, right? Like, okay, so we have a enterprise deal that gets converted. We're going to hand off into PS. At this point, AEs are involved, SEs are involved, PS is involved,
Executive sponsors on
CS is
both
there.
sides, managers,
There,
whatever. Yeah.
exactly. You got a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and if you actually go and take those people and interview them about what do you do during this time, what you find is that there's an incredible amount of like just knowledge gap of
Yeah.
like, oh well, like I couldn't find the deal update, I couldn't find the spec, it wasn't written the right way. We never faced this deployment infrastructure before. But all of that stuff's actually hidden in your organization today in Slack, in support tickets, in PRDs, and other sets of unstructured knowledge that AI is very good at surfacing.
Yeah.
So even just to start by like, hey, can we actually just make that data accessible via AI so that teams can do their job better as a very easy level one, I think is a home run in those
Totally.
scenarios.
Totally. Well, before we wrap, any other, thoughts or things that you would share, or, if you hadn't been spending the last 8 years, you wish you knew about, kind of the future of this technology in the revenue world?
No, I think maybe the last thing that I'll just close on
Yeah.
is like you have to get your hands dirty in it. And I say this to the leaders listening and also the ICs. And like it's still really interesting to me the amount of people we interview who say, I want to work here because it's an AI company, but their AI use is like putting an email in ChatGPT. And so like there's a huge opportunity to your first point of like, can your top performers outpace everybody else? Well, the question is like, is today's top performer ready to be an AI super user? Right? I don't know if we know what that gap is. So you have to get your hands dirty. You have to really start understanding what this does and what it doesn't do, how to apply it to your business, and then teaching your team and yourself how to upskill to the next level. And like to me, that's the most important part. I think the dirty secret in the space of AI right now is that usage and adoption is a question mark. Like
Yeah.
when we deploy these tools, we hear it all the time. Hey, we turn Gemini on and no one knows how to use it. So like, well, now what?
And that's why I think the combination of the kind of classic vertical SaaS model and native AI companies come together perfectly, which is, like you said, can we make it so it feels like you're not using another tool? Can it just be
Exactly.
given to you? That feels like the magic moment that, us as startups need to bring to market. Isn't X percentage of your team is going to be, the superstar and learn this new tool. Like that can't be it. You think about the
Exactly.
impact at a 500 person company, 5,000, 50,000 person company, you're going to have a fraction of the population leaning in and teaching themselves how do we build products and tools that just do it.
Yeah,
It feels
totally agree.
very different than, kind of learning technology before, like you were saying.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Awesome, man. Well, this was fun. Got me thinking a lot about, ways in which both we should be, building this for our own product as well as using it on our team. But yeah, hopefully other people kind of spark some thoughts as well. But yeah, Josh, thanks for taking the time. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it.